welcome back to another episode of Tech Pro Unicorn Podcast. I am your host, Michael Grace. Today we're going to talk about something that is the field in which I operate, which is healthcare. Our guest is quite diverse, which I really liked. Before the podcast started, we were chatting about it. But our guest is Mark Young. Mark is the CEO of Zona Health. He also has his own marketing company called the Rise Agency, RYZE, if you're following along at home. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Zona Health. So Mark has a resume that's steeped in business startups, entrepreneurial ventures. He joined the Zona Health team in 2016 with a single purpose to make Zona Plus a household name. To say that Mark's background is diverse would be an understatement, but one consistent thread ties it all together. He would say that it's a passion for education, delivering practical solutions in a way that invites people in. Zona Health education is the key to engagement, although Mark's credentials are impressive on their own, holding a variety of graduate degrees. He says that it's an experience that matters most. Credited for the launch of previous tech startups, Mark is no stranger to the world of compliance, marketing, and scalable growth. The Zona Plus, which is a blood pressure biohack, which is what we're going to talk about. A lot of us are battling high blood pressure, so that should be very interesting. And then Mark has a book out, and we're going to try to weave this in somehow, probably towards the end. But Mark is the author of a really cool book called Date Your Clients. And if you're following along at home, that's at dateyourclients.com. Lots of cool stuff there. So we're going to make sure we kind of put that in, because that just makes Mark even more interesting than he already is. So thanks, Mark, for taking the time and joining us on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm listening to this great introduction, and I want to meet this guy you're talking about.
So cool. Zona Plus, like how did you, maybe a little bit just more about your story, like how did you wind up, like you're in marketing and now you're, CEO of essentially a healthcare tech company. How did that come about?
Interesting. So, well, I'll say this. First of all, so yes, thank you for all of that. And I am the CEO at Zona Health, and I'm also the CEO at Rise Agency, again, RYZE agency.com. And so this is an interesting space because, yes, I work in the world of marketing and I work with a lot of startup and entrepreneurial brands in that respect. But the majority of our clientele all falls in the health and wellness space, specifically in the natural health and wellness and natural beauty. So we deal with brands and launch brands that are in that same space. You use the word biohack. And biohack, if people are familiar with that audience, it's a word that first got used by Dave Asprey at Bulletproof Executive and continues to prosper. The idea is that any of these devices, any of these products, any of these natural solutions, supplements, whatever it is, are triggering your body's natural response to things, right? And that's what you're trying to do, is with a non-pharmacological solution, get your body to do what your body was built to do. And that is, the body above all things is meant to heal itself and stay alive, right? We just need to provide the right stimulus or the right environment to do so. So Zona Health was actually a client that we had dealt with many years ago, and I'd actually made an investment in the company. And then at the point that the board of directors decided to make a change in the direction of the company, they approached me and asked if I was interested in getting involved in the leadership of the company. And of course, I gave them the answer everybody would, and that was no thanks. And laughingly, we had a conversation, and I said, all right, I get what you're trying to do. Let me help you out. I'll step in, and for 6 months, I'll take the reins while we look for leadership. That was about 4 years ago. And here I am still. The fun thing about Zona that I really enjoy is because of working with so many different brands in the marketing space in this biohack world, being the CEO of Zona Health not only gives me the perspective of the marketing guru, if you will, that's joining the conversation that way, but it really gives me a front row seat to what it's like to be the principal at one of these companies. So when I'm
Mhm.
dealing with my clients from the agency side, I'm talking to them as if it were me talking to me at the helm of Zona Health, right? Because I get their struggles, I get their frustrations in the medical space, I get their frustrations with the FDA, I get their frustrations in dealing with trying to educate a consumer on why using a medical device is better than living their life on pills. I get the frustration. I'm literally dealing with it firsthand. So you'd made a comment earlier and said, wow, you've got a bunch of different hats. You're like all over the place in this respect. And the truth is, yes, but I love that singularity of purpose. And that is, we're really trying to help get solutions into the hands of people who could use them and their natural type thing. So yes, marketing, yes, the Zona Health and the biotech and all this kind of stuff. That's how it all plays together, Michael. I hope that helps a little bit, anyways.
I love it. I love your story, right? You obviously had a passion for it. You made an investment, and then they recognized your leadership abilities to take it forward. I think my wife is an RN. She's an ICU RN who's now a lung transplant coordinator, and I'm always like blown away by the response to anything in the medical industry is to prescribe medication, right? That's like the first thing we do is to prescribe pills and medication. And people come in with this laundry list of all this stuff they're taking. And I always go, what would happen if you just stopped, right? Like, what would happen if you reset and stopped? And like, how do you know that it's like your body hasn't adapted or changed? Or it's just kind of crazy to me to ingest all this stuff, right? I'm the guy who's probably taken less than 20 Advil in my entire life, right? I don't prescribe to it. I don't believe in it. Uh, I look for more of the homeopathic or natural kind of remedies to solve problems. Um,
Sure.
talk to me about what Zona does, right? They've got this device, Zona Plus device. How does that work, right? How does a device that you hold lower blood pressure?
Well, I'm gonna give you two answers to that. I'm gonna give you the easy answer, then I'm gonna give you the more complicated answer. So the Zona Plus, and I'm holding one in my hand here if you've got video running. And the Zona Plus is actually it looks like a handheld phaser, if you will, from Star Trek, or we get it looks kind of like a scanner at the checkout. And so it's got that sort of shape to it. But what it does is you hold it in the palm of your hand in such a way that it can be gripped and compressed. So what we do is the device itself, it's been discovered, and I'll tell you, it's in the shape of, truthfully, the handle of an aircraft. So if you were flying a fighter jet, this is kind of what you would be holding, something that's shaped very much like this, very Top Gun relevant right now. The and the reason for that is because the story behind Zone is kind of interesting, and that is, I'll give you the quick history. The founder, the founder of the science years ago, is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Wiley, and Dr. Wiley actually he had been commissioned by the United States Air Force to study what's called G-force blackout. If you saw the new Top Gun movie, you understand that as you go too fast and you pass out, right? It's too much pressure on your body, you lose consciousness. And he was studying that back in the 80s for the US Air Force to find out, when pilots do go into this G-force speed, when they black out, how do you reduce the amount of time that they're out, or better yet, how do you avoid it altogether? While he was working on that study, he ended up finding, just coincidentally, nothing but serendipity, that the people who actually were on the study from the beginning to the end reduced their blood pressure. And he just happened to notice that was one of the biometric markers that was associated. And he's like, that's so weird, but I'll put that aside and I'll get back to it later. So after he finished his commission with the Air Force, he pulled that data back out and started studying and said, what is the reason behind this? And what he surmised was it was the isometric hand grip that was taking place on the joystick in the cockpit. That as the pilot accelerated, they would grip the handle firmer, And then he's like, well, maybe that's what's happening with it. So he studied it for years. I mean, I would say probably 10 to 15 years. He continued to research this topic and really learned the power of isometric, specifically hand grip, but isometric exercise in general. Now, for your audience, they may or may not know what isometric is in terms of exercise. So I'll explain and say there's three major types of exercise that the body can have. A muscle can do one of three things. It can move in what's called concentric motion, which is when it constricts. So that's, imagine a sit up and you're sitting up. There's eccentric, which is when the body actually relaxes back down, and that is the elongating of the muscle. And then there's isometric, which is when the body holds a muscle in an exact contraction for a period of time. So imagine the difference between I'm doing a sit up, I go up, concentric, I go down, eccentric. I'm doing a plank now. A plank is isometric because I'm holding the body in the exact same position of a contracted muscle over time. What Dr. Wiley had found was that through a series of different contractions and through a series of different grip strengths and so on, he found an exact algorithm that for a 2-minute period of time, 2 minutes on the right hand, 2 minutes on the left hand, and then repeat, at an exact algorithm, which is a percentage of maximum voluntary contraction, meaning when you turn the Zona on, you squeeze it as hard as you can, and then you do it the same thing with your left hand for just 3 seconds. It calibrates, then you start the exercise, and the exercise is actually a calculated range of however hard you squeezed it during that initial calibration. So what it does, and then it gives you auditory and visual cues to go up or down depending on if you're squeezing it too much, squeezing it too little, and it walks you through this whole exercise. Now that's how it keeps you in compliance. That's how you know you're in the exact same range. But your question, after I've given this whole history lesson, is how does it lower blood pressure, right? And the answer is twofold. And the shorter answer that I will give you is that when your body contracts something, so imagine that you're holding this device and you're holding at a percentage of your maximum contraction, your muscle becomes fatigued. Now, it's a 2-minute exercise, about 60 seconds in, you really start to feel it, much like a plank, right? Anybody can do a plank for a while, but the longer you do it, you're like, oh, this is easy, this is easy, this is easy. And you're like, oh my God, I'm going to collapse, right? It just happens. And the same thing kind of happens with this. About 60 seconds into that contraction, most people are like, oh, all right, I get it. What's happening here? Well, the brain is having that same reaction. And the brain is going, what's going on? My arm hurts. My arm, and again, it's not painful hurt, but it's stress. And, the brain is like, what's going on here? Like, is my arm in trouble? Is there an issue? Like, what's going on? I'm losing blood flow. Well, when the body recognizes that there's any kind of constriction like that would impair blood flow to an extremity, what it does is it triggers the production of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide, of course, is a natural vasodilator. So you're tricking the body into producing nitric oxide. Nitric oxide, of course, as that vasodilator, widens the diameter of the entire circulatory system, allowing blood to flow more freely. And by the time all of this happens, you've already let go of the device because your 2 minutes are up. So now all of a sudden you've opened all the blood vessels throughout the body. You've ended up with this vasodilation, nitric oxide's flowing through the system. You've let go of the device. Now you wait a minute and you move over to the left hand. But it's pretty simple in so much as it's not a complicated motion. And that nitric oxide flush is lowering the pressure that's going through your body. Now that's somewhat of a short-term solution because you can take nitric oxide capsules and lower your blood pressure that way as well, but you need to do it consistently. Same way that an antihypertensive, you mentioned blood pressure medication. Same way blood pressure medication works, many of them, not all of them, but many of them are happening much that same way. They're keeping the circulatory system expanded so that the pressure reduces. The problem with that is that as soon as you stop taking it, things go back to normal. Right. Does that all make sense so far?
It does.
All right. So now I'm going to give you the real science. So really what's happening in the body physiologically, we're all aging, right? That's just a natural everything. Eventually, people's hair will go gray. Eventually, you're going to have some aches and pains. Eventually, these things are going to happen, and it's just part of the natural decay of the body. Well, with the circulatory system, what happens is over time, age-related hypertension is caused by the hardening of the arteries. So what happens is the arteries start to stiffen, right? We call that arteriosclerosis. And that actually happens based on age, and it typically happens in what we would call the endothelial layer of the blood vessel. So the circulatory system, the arteries, they are actually layered with what's called the endothelium. Well, the endothelium is like a sponge. And when you're young, everything is soft. It's perfect, right? It's exactly the way it should be. And as you age, it begins to dry. And imagine like a hardened sponge. You know what a hard sponge is. If you had a hard sponge and it happened to be in a particular position, when it dried, it stays in that position. All the moisture is gone. Well, the endothelium starts to do that over time. What's crazy about it is that the endothelium is actually like the body's natural thermostat. And that is the endothelium is what recognizes high blood pressure and knows whether or not to expand or contract itself to lower pressure. Well, as the endothelium hardens, it loses its ability to even recognize that your blood pressure is high. Imagine the frog in the boiling water. We've all heard that tale before. So the frog's in the boiling water, and because it's a slow change, the frog doesn't even realize how hot the water is, and he boils to death.
Mm-hmm.
Much the same way, if the endothelium hardens, it doesn't recognize the blood pressure is high. The blood pressure goes high, and the endothelium ends up failing, and you end up with hypertension, and worse yet, it's some kind of cardiac event. So now here's what we're looking at. When you do a contraction, the way that Zona walks you through that isometric therapy, that isometric exercise that you're doing forces sodium release at the cellular level. Well, anybody who does any work in the physiological field, and I'm sure you do too, is sodium and potassium must always stay in balance at the cellular level. If this isometric exercise is forcing sodium out of a cell, the only way to maintain potassium and sodium balance is to also force potassium out of a cell. Potassium is the only thing that softens the endothelium. So as the endothelium begins to become softened, it becomes more flexible, and it begins to recognize my blood pressure is high. And then the body begins to self-regulate. So what you're really ultimately doing, if I can trace back to the beginnings here, is I'm doing this isometric exercise in an effort to trick potassium out of the cells to reverse the age of the endothelial lining of my blood vessels. And when that all happens, the body begins to self-regulate blood pressure, so you don't have to do anything. And it all of a sudden, your blood pressure begins to decline. And it's the reason why if a person doesn't use the Zona for a week, their blood pressure doesn't spike back up because the body knows what to do. Now, again, if you don't use it for a few months, your blood pressure could begin to creep up because age is age. You need to start using it again, you'll start bringing it back down. So it's an interesting connection of events that happen to make that blood pressure go down. But again, what we're doing is just restoring the body back to its ability to do what it's known to do. I will caveat to say that blood pressure raises for multiple different reasons. And in the blood pressure world, in that world of hypertension, there's a lot of reasons why hypertension can go up. It's one of the reasons why I can't stand the fact that that is considered a medical condition, because my answer is that's not the condition, that's the symptom. High blood pressure is a symptom of something else going on in the body, and yet we treat the symptom. We don't actually treat what's really going on, which is a problem. And as you mentioned earlier, standard of care is that if a person goes into a doctor and the person is diagnosed with any type of hypertension, it is standard of care to prescribe. And they have to be given an antihypertensive or sign that you refused it, or else the doctor can have financial liability. And that's in my opinion, it's a complete failure of the system, but that's another conversation. How's that for a big giant science answer, Michael?
I love it. I love it, right? I mean, it hit on so many, when you explain it, you're like, okay, that all makes sense, right? Like
Right.
science of it just makes sense. It's interesting, right? I think people go to our physicians, right? And I operate in the healthcare space on the provider side for large healthcare systems, helping them improve patient care. And it's, I always get the why can't we fix it, right? Like why is it the way it is? Why is it broken? And that's a really complex answer. I hate when I tell people I'm a healthcare consultant. Because people are like, why haven't you fixed this? And I'm like, well, if it was up to me and my magic powers, I absolutely would, but I can't. And no one's empowered me to do so. And I wouldn't have the damn answer even if I was empowered. But a lot of it is people don't really think through their own medical conditions. Like when they have something, they go to their doctor and they just accept blindly, like, oh, I need to take this pill because my doctor said. And they don't really research, like, what are the non-standard answers, right? I have chronic shoulder pain, and I went to the doctor 20 years ago, and they said you need surgery, right? And I was like, wow, do I really need surgery? And then I started getting massage and stuff, and I was like, wow, I can totally manage this with stretching and massage, right? I didn't need surgery, but that was all. It's like if you go to a store that only sells one thing, that's what they're going to give you, right? Because that's all they sell. They can't give you something they don't sell, so they're going to push what they sell, right? And people don't pause and go, oh, are there alternatives, right? Oh, I'm going to have high blood pressure. What do I do? They could very well look to something like Zona Health, um, Zona Plus, and go, oh, let me try that, right? And I get the financial investment to do that, but you're going to spend what the Zona Plus costs anyway on all your medications, even with copays and such. You're eventually going to get there versus a one-time investment.
100%. And the thing is I'll say this, and that is there's a breakage in the healthcare system, and people can talk about how it's financially driven and whatnot. But the problem I'm going to say, like, is the medical system broke? Yes. Is the insurance system broke? Yes. All of that stuff is a disaster, and it may all be very financially motivated. I don't know. I'm trying not to be a cynic on that, but first of all, I believe that we have a sick care system, not a healthcare system. And we don't try to keep people healthy. We just try to take care of them once they're sick. And that's a sad situation for the world. But I'll take it back to that. And I'll say that I'm a big proponent of personal responsibility. And it sounds like, you're echoing that same thing. And that is, I don't care how broken the system is. I mean, the medical system, the insurance system, all of it can be broken, but none of them have ever stopped me from going to the gym. None of them have ever stopped me from eating a salad. And all of it gets back to personal accountability. So when you say people go in and they just take whatever they're taking, the answer is that we have completely, I will say that we've given away our own expertise about our own bodies. Like there is no doctor alive that knows my body better than I do, right? Because they may know the physiology better than I do, but they don't know what hurts. They don't know to what degree. They don't know what that happens. And the truth of the matter is there's no nutritionist that knows how my diet works better in my body than me, because I know how each food makes me feel. And the truth of the matter is it's a complete. I will say we've abdicated our own rights and our own authority to our health and given it away to physicians. And therein is the problem. Physicians aside, I mean, sure, they may be wrong and they may be, giving out drugs more than you or I would prefer, but no one made you take them. Like, people need to be responsible for their own health. And if the last 2 years have done anything for the world, I'm hoping, and I'm seeing evidence of, that people have realized that their health is their responsibility. Like, you are responsible for your health, nobody else.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, we're in a world that's very different than it has been, right? With gym memberships being $10 a month, right? Pretty much anywhere you can find a gym membership now for $10 a month. And, people used to say, oh, healthy food is so expensive. Well, now it really isn't, right? It's really came down. And
Yeah.
our pretty
I heard
equitable.
a quote recently that made a comment about if you think healthy is expensive, try being sick.
Yeah, yeah. Try getting the hospital medical bills. I cyber stalk all my guests, and for those of you following along and want to see, following along, and want to see the phaser kind of device that Mark was sharing, Zona.com is the website, and you can see the device and such there, along with the science that Mark explained. They have a really good science section that just kind of walks you through it. But there's a great quote on here. Many of you have read the book Superhuman by Dave Asprey, who has a lot of like alternative, thoughts around how to reduce your aging, slow it, be healthier. And his quote, which was really cool, says, "You must try the Zona Plus." Do people wait till they have, the signs of high blood pressure, or is this something that folks can just incorporate into their daily routine that are totally healthy?
So my recommendation is that if there's something that you can easily do that incorporates into your daily activity, why wouldn't you include it? I see no reason why you couldn't add an extra exercise to your routine. And the reality is that we all age, and using a device like this is just as much preventative. But we do actually have people who use it because increased nitric oxide in the body. So like they'll use it after a gym workout. Because increased nitric oxide improves muscle recovery. We actually have a lot of people, and this is all related to circulation, but we have a lot of people. This is anecdotal, but the science makes sense with the anecdote, and that is a lot of people use it to correct ED. That because increased nitric oxide and increased circulation actually reverses the symptoms of erectile dysfunction. And so we've got anecdotes about people who use it for all sorts of different things, people who use it through meditation, because you actually have to pay attention to how hard you're squeezing it. So it kind of forces your brain out of other things, because it really focuses that singularity of purpose. So multiple different applications for something like this. If someone is listening and wants to go visit Zona.com, I would tell them we created a coupon code just for you, Michael. It's GRACE100. And GRACE100 is the coupon code that'll save your listener $100 on the purchase of the device. So that's beneficial to you guys. But the device definitely, it works. That's the most I can say is it's 15 years we've been on the market. Our reviews are incredibly high. The stories we get from people are incredible. And the science pans out. We've had studies from the Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins University, the Harvard Health Review. We've been studied by all the majors, and we get contacted by universities that are doing research all over the world, to be honest with you, that are doing more research into this world of isometrics. And we've just really been on the cutting edge. Dave Asprey has been a huge proponent of the device for many years. In fact, he was also one of the early investors in the company. So Dave also promotes it. In fact, he mentions it in the Superhuman book, which is really cool because he talks about it being one of Dave's Superhuman really talks about people are going to die of one of four reasons. And one of his reasons is cardiovascular disease. And this is one of the pieces of advice that he gives to people to avoid dying of cardiovascular disease is to make sure that they're exercising their heart using a device like this, because it's entirely different than running or any kind of aerobic exercise. This is anaerobic exercise, not aerobic. Big difference, and your body needs both.
I love it. I love the coupon code. Well, one of my frustrations is with the payer side of healthcare, right? How are you guys finding, payers, insurance companies, right? If people are like, "Oh, I need this, I just can't swing the cost. Can I go to my insurance?" Right? Like sometimes that just doesn't work, right? And it doesn't work with chiropractic care, which is beneficial. It doesn't work with a lot of things that actually make a difference. Our healthcare system, right, for a whole bunch of reasons that we could do a whole episode on all the reasons why payers aren't playing, even though there's science behind all these solutions. How are you guys finding the payers in the space related to the product?
So the fortunate thing is, we're a $500 product, so we're not out of the reach of the average consumer, as opposed to a lot of the solutions that I see in other kinds of medical devices that are upwards into the $5, 10, $15,000 for the types of devices. So we're very minimally priced compared to a lot of those types of things. But what I will say is, we do get people who ask those questions. It goes back to that I'm abdicating my health to the insurance company's decisions, right? If the insurance company doesn't pay for it, then I guess I just don't get it. And that to me is so weird, because people put into their monthly budgets, eating out and going to the movies and all of these other types of line items that show up in their budgets. But I've never seen anybody who built a budget around health care, and that is how much of my income do I allocate towards vitamins? How much of my income am I going to allocate towards finding, better ways to, using red light? How much money am I going to move aside towards, cryotherapy? And the types of things that are going to do incredible things for your health and literally lead you to happiness and everything else, which leads to higher productivity and higher output and better responses at the gym, and you name it. Like, all of these things work hand in hand. And I'm like, but you literally put a budget line in there for eating out and going to the movies. And the reason is because, well, I have health insurance, and I've got $1,000 in the bank so that I've got a disaster just in case I end up hospitalized. I can pay the copay or the deductible. But the reality is like, healthcare is not, I have insurance too, but if I need something that's going to promote my health, I need to do the research. I need to decide what that is. And it's up to me to never have to use that insurance, right? Like that, I don't want to use my insurance. I'd gladly give them the premium every month and never have to use it. It's there, and I look at it much like a disaster fund for insurance. But my day to day and my health is my responsibility, and I wish we could get every listener to repeat that phrase and mean it. So in terms of like, how do we deal with insurance reimbursements and those types of questions, pretty much the spiel I just gave you, and that is, your healthcare is your responsibility. And if the reason you're not going to stop taking pills and start doing exercise is because the insurance company isn't going to pay for it, you've got a priorities problem, truthfully, and it's yours. I mean, I can't tell you what to do, but I wish more people would wake up to it. And the good news, again, Michael, is that with my ear to the ground in the industry, this world of naturopathic, homeopathic, biohack, all of these words that we use to try to describe ourselves, it's significantly increasing in interest right now, because you are just seeing, and part of it, not to go political, but a lot of it is based on what we're seeing based on COVID. You see, all of a sudden it takes 15 years to produce a vaccine for something, but with COVID, we get it done in a month and a half. People are like, wait a minute, like something's wrong. I don't know. And I don't know if it's because maybe the vaccine moved too fast. Maybe everything else doesn't move fast enough. Who knows? I don't know the answer in that, but it's really making people stop and go, well, these things don't match. And maybe I should pay more attention to me. And maybe I should take care of these things. And I'll tell you, my big disconnect at COVID was when my gym was forced to close, but I could go to McDonald's. And I honestly, I've repeated that phrase more times than I ever wish to. But literally, when my gym was told to close and McDonald's was still open, I sat there, at home, and I went, this has nothing to do with my health. Because if it was about my health, you would have found a way. And you're telling me, I live in South Florida, so truthfully, I can't even complain about COVID restrictions because I'm in Florida. But the truth of the matter is when all of this happened, and in our county here, we were told that in order to go jogging on the beach, you had to wear a mask. And I'm like, literally, you're outside by yourself. And I'm like, you're not giving me health tips. Like, and that's what bothered me. That's what hurt. And I'm like, that's not healthy. Like, it's not healthy to run. You shouldn't go running with a mask on. That's terrible for you. Like, what are you telling people? And so those are the things that, again, from the insurance standpoint and from the medical community standpoint, I'm hoping that the shift that I'm seeing um, is a bigger thing than what I'm seeing. I hope it's even bigger than what I'm seeing, because I'm seeing great movement, and I hope it's even bigger. And I think we've seen it in a lot of different spaces, particularly this natural health, homeopathic, like Dave Asprey's conventions, like they are growing by leaps and bounds, and he's charging $1,500 a ticket to even get into the convention, and they're selling out.
Yeah. It's interesting. I always just tell people, like, make informed decisions, right? Like, your dentist might say, like, hey, based on your dental health, you need to go 3 times a year instead of 2, and then you're like, oh yeah, my teeth are hurting, blah blah blah, and your insurance company goes, oh, we only reimburse for 2. You're crazy if you don't go for 3, right? Like, if you're having dental
Absolutely.
health, like we're talking like $60, right? If you can't find $60 in your budget, give me a call. I'll find $60 in your budget for you, right?
Take it on
it,
eating out in movies.
yeah, people always tell me, right? Like, wow, that was great, Michael, but I don't have time, right? And I'm like, okay, let's do a time study. Where do you spend your time? Why are you sitting in front of a plastic box for 2 hours a night and then tell me you don't have time to invest in yourself or your business? I'm not buying it,
Absolutely.
right? And it's the same thing with budgeting. Like, well, I had to have this and I had to have that. You don't have to have anything, right? Food, clothing, and shelter, and healthcare, right? If it doesn't deal with your health and you being fed and clothed appropriately, then it's not a necessity, and people waste so much money. So I love the holding kind of the listeners accountable to invest in themselves. I want to pivot and talk about date your clients, just because for those of us following along at home, dateyourclients.com. It's kind of cool. And I was like, wait, is this a dating site? Like, what's going on? Am I going to be like swiping right or left on Mark? Like, what is happening here? But it's really cool because it takes kind of it puts on your marketing hat. I love one of your quotes, right? You will never know if someone swiped left on you. And for those of you that are maybe not on dating apps, or dating apps like Tinder and such, you would swipe right or swipe left. Swipe right means you like them. Swipe left means you're passing on them. Talk to me a little bit about Date Your Clients, because it sounds so cool.
So I'm going to throw this out there, and I'll try to make a segue into here from our last conversation. So my background is quite varied, but I work in marketing, and obviously in this healthcare space, I'm always working in marketing and whatnot. And I told you, one of the things I enjoy is I get to feel the first person experience of what my clients feel, because I'm also at the helm of a ship here too. Well, one of the things that I've had the fortune of being able to do is I work with a lot of people on a daily basis. And these are relatively high level people for the most part. They're entrepreneurs. And if you've got entrepreneurs that are listening on this on this podcast, they're all crazy, Michael, every one of them. And I'm speaking as one of them. Because there's nothing that makes sense about entrepreneurship, right? Absolutely nothing. I'm going to take everything I own. I'm going to put it on the line for an idea, knowing that only a fraction of the people who bet on this are ever going to be successful. And then I'm going to work 80 hours a week and probably skip a paycheck for a while. Like, none of it makes sense. Like, there's none of it that makes any sense. And yet we do it every single darn day. So where Date Your Clients comes out is I get to work with these entrepreneurs, but one of the things that I enjoy most is talking to them about relationships, and how every relationship in business is nearly identical to every other relationship you have in life, because it's all about people. And at the end of the day, people are people. It doesn't matter how I know you or in what way we have community. We're people and we engage the same way. So Date Your Clients actually started as an email, to be honest with you, to a client who I was having a conversation with her, because she was talking about how, her website her website's fine because her TV commercial tells, everything and blah, blah, blah. And I'm trying to explain to her, I'm like, but you don't understand. People are actually coming to your website and leaving. Like, your bounce rate is so high because you're giving me no value. And I try explaining this to her, and I'm like, look, they're all swiping left. Like, they're swiping left and you have no idea why they're swiping left. because you're just leaving. Like they're coming to your website and just leaving before they ever get a chance to talk to you. And you're sitting here thinking that your TV commercial is broken. And I'm telling you, your TV commercial got them to the website. Your TV commercial did its job. Your website's damaged because everybody's swiping left when they get there. And I'm like, it's kind of like you putting a really ugly picture of yourself on a dating profile. Like, you would never do that. Okay, you would only put your best pictures. You would only tell so much of the story. You wouldn't go tell me about the time you got embarrassed in the 8th grade when, whatever. You don't go into that kind of detail. Okay, that's what happens at your first date. Then we talk about those things. And maybe at the 3rd date, 5th date, we talk about insecurities. But we don't get into that stuff so early. So truthfully, Date Your Client started as an email to a client. And the more I wrote, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm writing a book here. Turns out I really was writing a book there. Chapter by chapter, I got to tell you, it's so fun for me because chapter by chapter, we really go through every stage of a relationship. It's the first date. It's the dating site. It's meeting the parents. It's the first fight. It's all of these things are discussed because it's not any different than what you're dealing with in your personal life. So your personal life, you're like, okay, I'm going on a first date. I need to make a good first impression. But when you go to work and you're going to meet a client for the first time, do you spend an extra half hour getting ready in the morning? Because to you, it's Tuesday, but to your client, it's the first time they've ever met you, right? It's their first impression of you. But here you are like, it's Tuesday, no big deal. And therein lies a problem. And so we talk about personal accountability with our health, and we talk about personal accountability with our finances in order to fund our health. But I'm going to segue to this and say it's personal accountability in relationships. That is, what are we contributing to the relationship we have with our professional lives? Because we ought to be treating it the same way we do our personal lives, because at the end of it, it's all pretty much the same, right? They're all people.
I love it. I love your just your humor and such, right? Like if you're following along at home and you scroll down, I love the reviews, right? The reviews are in, and we have Queen Elizabeth who gave a review. Very cool. Scarlett Johansson's review is awesome. I went on a date with Mark. He opened the car door, brought NDAs, paid for dinner, never called him again, but it was a good time. It's just
I have
so
to tell you,
awesome.
I have to give credit for those to my art director because those were a surprise to me also. Those were put on the book cover design without my knowledge. And when I saw them, I belly laughed so hard that I insisted they stay.
It's so awesome. Yeah.
So fun.
Yeah. I'll leave it up for folks to go check out the site to see Queen Elizabeth's review. But it's just so fun. It's so awesome, right? To make lightheartedness as engagement, and thus people will turn to the next chapter and keep reading, hopefully. And I love the last thing, right? The bottom of the website, the very bottom. It's like lessons are always taught. They're not necessarily learned. It's so awesome to hear that because I say that all the time. I'm like, just because somebody taught you or communicated doesn't mean that was ever received and processed and acted upon, right? So many people think, well, I taught them, or I said this, or I did this, but did you really? Like, meaning, did the other person really hear you, engage, listen, act upon? No. So, I love it, Mark. You're just hella dynamic. You're like all over it, and I love it. I mean, because they're related, and date your clients. I love it. I was like, where's he going with this? Where's he going with this date your clients thing? But it makes total sense.
It's got a bit of a provocative title, right?
It creates the engagement, right? Like I want to read it. I'm like, this is really cool. Because I always talk about client relationships, right? Like I'm a relationship guy. I have clients that follow me around, wherever I'm working at the moment, right? They just come with me. And I so appreciate all my clients and my clients that do that. But it's because I haven't dated them necessarily, right? But I have strong relationships with them. And we went through this process that you're describing probably in your book, right? Like, we had a first date and a second date. And, hopefully we haven't gotten to third base or anything like that, but we've definitely got a knowledge of each other and some trust that happens in
Absolutely.
relationships. Very cool. Well, Mark, thank you for taking the time and for stepping in and leading a healthcare company, right, that does something other than push pills at folks and offers a great solution. And thank you for taking the time and the effort to share all the science behind Zona Health and the isometric exercises. I took a bunch of notes because I was like, ooh, yeah, isometric. That's why I can't plank for like longer than my daughter, who can plank for what seems like forever. So I learned a ton, and it's really cool. Thank you for the coupon code for those of you listening that are on Zona Health and are like, oh, I think I'll give this thing a try. The $100 off with the code Grace100. I'll put that in the show links down below, along with the links to both of Mark's site. Heck, I might even put all three in there, and we'll do the agency link as well.
Try them all. Why not?
I love it. Yeah, 3 different ways you can
Sounds
get a
good.
hold of me. I love it. Thanks for taking the time, Mark, and sharing all this knowledge. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Michael. I appreciate the time. Thank you.